My sister humiliated me for years in front of friends and family, and her debts and manipulations were gradually getting out of control. I decided to take revenge. I publicly revealed the truth about her actions and gathered evidence to restore justice. Hi, this is Arena of Revenge. Here you'll find exciting stories with gripping plots and vengeance. Follow us. From childhood, my sister treated me with disdain. We grew up in a Chicago suburb, in an average middle-class American family. My parents worked hard and tried to provide us with everything they could, but their attention and warmth weren't always equally divided. I was the youngest child, and my sister, 3 years older, constantly tried to show that she was superior, smarter, and prettier. As a child, this manifested itself in small ways. She would make fun of my clothes, tell my friends I was weird or that I had no talent. As I got older, this only intensified. In high school, when she started hanging out with the popular kids, her favorite pastime became humiliating me in front of her friends. She would call me into her room when she had friends over and make me do something ridiculous, and then everyone would laugh. If I tried to object, she would say it was a joke and that I was too sensitive. My parents often didn't notice or pretended not to notice. They thought it was just normal sibling teasing, but I felt like she was doing it on purpose, trying to elevate herself at my expense. Over the years, I learned to tolerate it, but resentment built up inside. When she went to college, I hoped things would change, but she'd come home and it would happen again. She'd invite friends over, and I'd become the butt of the joke again. She'd tell them I was a loser, that I didn't have a girlfriend, that I wouldn't be able to get into a good university. People laughed, though I could tell some were uncomfortable, but no one took my side. I attended a local college, worked part-time at an electronics store, and saved money. Unlike her, I tried to be independent. My sister, on the other hand, lived on credit. She bought clothes, expensive jewelry, paid with cards, and kept telling them she'd have everything because she was pretty and smart. But I knew she was in debt. Letters arrived several times, and I accidentally saw the amounts owed. She pretended to have everything under control, but I could see that it wasn't. At some point, too much had built up inside me. The last straw was the evening when she invited friends over, and I went into the kitchen to get some water. She loudly said in front of everyone that I was probably still a virgin and had never dated a girl. Everyone started laughing. I pretended not to care, but something inside me broke. Then I came up with a plan. Her birthday was coming up soon. Her parents wanted to throw a party at home, invite her friends and relatives. I decided this would be my chance. For several weeks, I gathered information. I went into her room when she was out, took pictures of letters from banks, debt notifications, even printed out a few documents from her laptop. I knew it was risky, but the desire for revenge outweighed it. When the day of the party came, I prepared everything in advance. My parents ordered food, decorated the house, invited guests. My sister was beaming. She had put on a new dress, again bought on credit, and was acting like a queen. When her friends arrived, she started making jokes about me again. She said I still lived with my parents, that I didn't have a normal job, that I was boring and uninteresting. Everyone laughed, and I sat and waited for the right moment. When the cake came out and the congratulations began, I said I had a gift too. Everyone looked at me, and my sister grimaced, expecting something absurd. I took out my tablet and connected it to the TV in the living room. Photos of her letters from the banks appeared on the screen. They contained debt amounts, notices of late payments, messages warning about card blocking. I compiled a selection with commentary. The room went silent. At first, people didn't understand what was happening, but after a few seconds it became clear. There were amounts there, thousands of dollars in debt. All her friends sat in shock. My sister turned pale. She tried to turn off the TV, but I'd locked the remote control and connected everything via cable. I told her that this was the real truth about her, that she pretended to be successful and confident, but was actually drowning in debt and hiding it. People started whispering. Some tried to look away, others laughed openly. My sister stood rooted to the spot, then started screaming for me to turn it off, but it was too late. My parents were also shocked. They didn't know about her debts. My mother covered her face with her hands, and my father sat there, blushing with shame. My sister lunged at me, but her friends pulled her away. I calmly collected the tablet and told her that now everyone knew who she really was. The party was completely ruined. Some guests started leaving, some stayed, but the atmosphere was heavy. My sister ran to her room, slamming the door. My parents were silent, unsure of what to say. I felt a strange relief. For the first time in years, I was able to answer her. I understood that after this, our life as a family would change. She would never forgive me, but I didn't regret it. I looked at the empty plates, the cake that hadn't been cut, and thought that I'd finally regained my respect. That night, the house was silent. My parents talked for a long time behind closed doors, and I sat in my room, feeling the tension in the air. I knew this was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. The scene with the TV, the faces of the guests, my parents' reactions, and my sister's scream replayed in my head over and over again. In the morning, I went into the kitchen, where my mother and father were already sitting. Their appearance indicated that the conversation would be difficult. My mother looked exhausted, as if she had been crying all night. My father was stern, but you could tell from his eyes that he was angry. They immediately said that we would all talk together that evening. I understood what they meant. During the day, the house was tensely silent. My sister did not come out of her room, only occasionally slamming the door loudly when going down for food. My parents were busy with chores, but I could see that they were waiting for the evening. I paced the room, feeling my anxiety mounting. On the one hand, I was sure I'd done the right thing, but on the other, I knew I'd have to answer for it. We gathered around the table that evening. My parents sat across from us, and the atmosphere felt like a courtroom. My father began by asking my sister about her debts. At first, she tried to deny it, saying everything was wrong, but then she realized there was no point in hiding it. She admitted that she did indeed owe several $1,000s and that she'd been putting off resolving the issue for a long time. She said she'd been going through hard times, that she'd planned to pay it all back, and that she didn't want to worry her parents. My mother sighed and asked why she hadn't told me right away. My sister replied that she'd been afraid of being judged, afraid of being seen as a failure. Then she abruptly turned the subject to me. She said that if it weren't for me, no one would have known she was in debt, and that I'd deliberately humiliated her. Her voice trembled, but her anger was stronger. She accused me of ruining her life and reputation, and now she wouldn't be able to communicate normally with people. My parents turned to me. My father asked why I did it that way. I could have told them directly, talked to them at home, but I chose the cruelest way. I felt their words hit harder than I expected. I replied that I couldn't take it anymore, that she had humiliated me in front of everyone for years, and I wanted everyone to see her for real just once. I said that I was tired of being the target of her ridicule, tired of remaining silent and enduring. Silence fell in the room again. My mother looked at me reproachfully, but also at my sister. She said that we were both to blame. My sister had destroyed me emotionally, and in return, I had humiliated her publicly. My father, however, was categorical. He said that my sister's behavior was one thing, but what I had done was a betrayal of the family. These words hit me hard. I tried to explain that I simply wanted justice, but they were no longer listening so attentively. My sister sat there stone-faced, occasionally casting angry glances at me. Then my mother suggested we discuss her debts. She admitted they were around $15,000. My parents were shocked. They couldn't understand how she could have saved so much. She explained that she'd used credit cards, bought clothes and jewelry, traveled to Los Angeles with friends, and paid with her credit card, thinking she'd somehow pay it off. But somehow never happened. Now the banks were demanding repayment and some of the cards had already been blocked. My parents tried to think rationally. My father said he'd have to help, but under strict conditions. No more shopping, no irresponsible behavior, and my sister would have to find additional work. She flared up. She said it was humiliating and that she wasn't going to work as a waitress or a salesperson. Then my father raised his voice. He said there was no other choice, and that if she didn't get her act together, the consequences would be worse. I sat there silently, but inside I was seething. Part of me was glad the truth had come out, but part of me felt like I'd been the one getting picked on again. My parents looked at her with pity and sternness, and at me with accusation. At the end of the conversation, my mother said she hoped we could forgive each other, but I could see that my sister didn't even want to think about it. When the meeting ended, she stood up and walked past me as if I were nothing. There was so much hatred in her gaze that I became uneasy. I realized we were now enemies. That night, I couldn't sleep again for a long time, wondering what would happen next. I knew my sister wouldn't stop. She wasn't one to admit defeat. She would definitely figure out how to return the favor. I felt like this was only the beginning of a war within our family. After the family conversation, tension hung in the house and couldn't be relieved. My sister practically never left her room, but I could see that she was still trying to take action. The next morning, I noticed the first signs of her revenge. She started actively using social media. At first, it was just hints, photos with friends and captions like, "Some people can't live their own lives and try to tell others what to do." I didn't pay attention at first, but then I noticed she started posting old photos of me from school and captioning them in ways that portrayed me as a loser. One of them was a photo of me as a teenager at a school event with a silly haircut, and she captioned it, "Some people stay kids their whole lives." People started liking and commenting, and many laughed. I realized my sister was deliberately constructing a narrative where I was angry, vindictive, and a loser, and she was the victim. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling that my friends and acquaintances were starting to believe her was nagging. At college, people started whispering. One friend asked me point blank if it was true that I had deliberately ruined my sister's party and that it was because of jealousy. I explained the situation, but I looked pathetic because everyone had only heard one version, my sister's. She knew how to play the victim, and people accepted it as the truth. After a few days, I noticed that even my college friends were inviting me out less often. I saw some people cautiously turn away when I passed by. It was a strange feeling, as if I had already become an outcast among those who had previously considered me a normal person. My parents didn't yet know about her social media activity. I knew that if I told them, they would blame me again. "You hurt her, and now she's taking revenge." So I kept quiet. A feeling of helplessness and anxiety was growing inside me. My sister wasn't limiting herself to posts. She started exchanging private messages with friends, forwarding screenshots of old conversations where I'd said stupid things or complained about trivial things, and captioned them in a way that made me look ridiculous or absurd. Every day I checked social media and saw that her actions were having an effect. People were actually starting to talk about me behind my back, sometimes directly asking if it was true that I was jealous and unkind. I realized this was gradually ruining my reputation. At home, she became even more irritable. Any attempt to talk to her ended in yelling or ignoring me. She didn't even try to pretend the situation was normal. I began to notice my parents looking at me with more caution. My mother would sometimes ask, "Are you sure you did the right thing?" Or, "Are you making a big deal out of it?" I saw that their support was no longer guaranteed. They were more focused on keeping my sister from debt and stress, and I found myself complicating things. In college, a friend advised me, "It's better not to react, she'll burn out on her own." But I knew that if I didn't defend myself, her version of the story would become the only one everyone would accept. I decided to tread carefully. First, I gathered evidence that her posts and forwarded messages were distorting reality. I took screenshots of her admitting to debt, which showed I wasn't making things up but merely laying out the facts. That evening, I sat down at my laptop and plotted how to show people the truth without creating another scandal. Meanwhile, my sister, apparently noticing I was about to do something, became even more active. She posted photos with captions that included insinuating comments like, "Sometimes people think justice is paramount, but that's just their delusion," and "Some people like to make a spectacle out of other people's mistakes." I realized she was aiming directly at me, and that she was trying to portray me as dangerous, aggressive, and unfair. I felt the situation spiraling out of control. People who had previously been my friends were starting to accept her version of events as the truth, because she was persuasive, skilled at choosing her words and creating the illusion of truth. Within a week, I noticed my life was becoming limited. College, home, friends, everything seemed to be under my sister's control. She knew I couldn't engage in open conflict with her, or it would look even worse. I realized I would only act with evidence. Over the weekend, I gathered all the documents, letters, and screenshots and compiled a neat compilation of the facts. My plan was simple: show people that I hadn't made up the situation, but had simply revealed the truth about her debts and manipulations. It was also important to present it correctly, without accusations or malice, otherwise my sister might again portray me as the aggressor. During these days, I also observed my parents. They began to notice that my sister was behaving strangely, becoming irritable, checking her phone frequently, and reacting to messages with excessive emotion. My mother asked me a couple of times why I spent so much time in my room and didn't interact with my sister. I told her I wanted to focus on my studies so as not to create any more conflict. But deep down, I knew my sister was plotting another attack. And then I realized one thing. If I didn't act quickly and thoughtfully, she could ruin my reputation completely. After I saw how my sister used social media and her friends to paint me as a loser, I knew I couldn't stand it anymore. Her actions had become too extreme, and every day I felt like she was constructing a web of lies around me. I saw acquaintances cautiously turning away, and I saw her version of events being recounted at college, and it filled me with a mixture of anger and determination. I knew she was acting out of pure hatred. She wanted me to look worthless, to be avoided, to make any contact with friends or family bring me shame and humiliation. I couldn't just watch and remain silent any longer. The day after I again stumbled upon her posts alluding to my envy and inability to live, I decided to take action. I began collecting all the facts, letters from banks about her debts, screenshots of messages where she admitted to spending, photos of her credit cards and notifications. I understood that the only way to put everything in its place was to carefully and thoughtfully present the truth to those who now believed her. My first step was to act through friends and acquaintances with whom I maintained normal relationships. I created a separate correspondence and began showing them the evidence, without malice or accusations, just the facts. Here are the letters about the debts. Here is her correspondence where she admits to taking out loans to spend on shopping and entertainment, not on the family's needs. Reactions varied. Some were skeptical at first, because my sister was a persuasive person, and many were accustomed to seeing her as the victim. But gradually, as the evidence began to come together, many began to understand that I wasn't lying or putting on a show. I watched her face gradually change in the eyes of her friends. From the doll everyone considered a victim, she began to look like someone hiding the truth and manipulating others. My sister noticed something was happening. She started posting more on social media, including screenshots of my words, making them appear offensive or funny. She wanted to prove that I was trying to tarnish her reputation and that she was simply defending herself. I realized this was another attempt to ruin my life, so I decided to act more openly, but cautiously. I compiled a collection of all the evidence, letters from banks, her own confessions, screenshots of messages and comments she had posted herself. I created a careful presentation for my parents and immediate family, trying to show the truth without emotion or insults. When I showed it to my mother and father, the reaction was immediate. My mother pulled herself together, but she saw how hard it was to admit that her daughter had manipulated me like that. My father remained silent at first, then said that such behavior was unacceptable and that everyone must now take responsibility for their actions. My sister tried to intervene, yelling, saying I was making it up and that she was the victim, but my parents finally saw the evidence and started asking specific questions. Where she got the money, why she opened new credit cards, why she didn't tell me ahead of time. I soon realized this was only the first step. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her hatred and actions. After talking with my parents, I decided to continue my careful revenge in a wider circle. I began sharing evidence with people who had previously doubted her or sided with her. In college, I subtly demonstrated that my sister's information was distorted, providing facts and correspondence that no one could dispute. I watched as trust in her gradually eroded, and my friends began to understand who was really to blame for the conflict. My sister, noticing that I was starting to win, became nervous. She could no longer control the situation through social media as she once had. Her posts and hints became less convincing, and her attempts to persuade her friends and family were distrusted. I felt justice being served, but I knew I had to tread carefully to prevent her from turning the tables on me again. At the same time, tension remained at home. My sister tried to provoke me, say hurtful things, test my parents, and try to get them on her side. I responded calmly and coolly, showing that her manipulations were no longer working. I felt satisfied, but at the same time, I knew the conflict wasn't over. My revenge wasn't aimed at humiliation, but at restoring justice, to make her understand that hatred and manipulation have consequences and that you can't ruin someone else's life with impunity. With every step, I saw her losing control, and I regaining the respect of my parents, friends, and relatives. It was slow but precise revenge, I didn't yell or create scandals, I simply showed the truth. And it worked. I knew this was only the beginning, that my sister would hold a grudge, but now I had a tool to protect myself and my reputation. The hatred she felt for me turned against her, and my determination to show the facts became my weapon. I was no longer the child she could humiliate with impunity. I had become someone who could act calmly, but decisively. After several weeks of constant pressure from my sister via social media and friends, I began to notice that her strategy of spreading false information was gradually crumbling. At first, there were small signs. Acquaintances began asking clarifying questions. A friend sent me screenshots of her messages in which she herself admitted to hiding debts, taking out loans for entertainment and shopping, and that her versions of events were deliberately distorted. These facts allowed people to compare her words with the reality of the situation and spot inconsistencies. I realized this was a crucial moment, and I needed to tread carefully to completely destroy her narrative, but without causing a direct confrontation, lest she turn the situation to her advantage. I started meeting with friends and acquaintances individually, showing them the evidence: bank letters, debt notifications, screenshots of messages where she herself described expenses and debts, photos of receipts and bills. I explained everything calmly, without emotion, just the facts. People began to see the whole picture. She was manipulating them, making me feel guilty, while she herself was hiding the truth. The reaction was immediate. Those who had previously trusted my sister began to lose trust. Some of her friends directly wrote to her that they no longer took her version of events seriously. It became noticeable in college, too. One of the professors we both studied with accidentally saw the correspondence and asked why she was hiding some information and making me feel guilty. He didn't blame me, but he did reprimand my sister for her behavior that didn't meet the standards of honest communication. I felt my sister's reputation gradually crumbling. She became nervous. I saw it in her actions on social media. Her new posts became chaotic, her photo captions lost coherence, and her insinuations were no longer convincing. With each passing day, her efforts to play the victim backfired. Her friends began cautiously discussing with her the possibility that she herself was to blame for the current situation. She tried to defend her position, but the evidence I was collecting was compelling and publicly visible to everyone in our circle. One evening, she approached me in my room, trying to talk things over, but I remained calm. I didn't yell or accuse her verbally. I simply showed her some of the evidence her friends had already seen. Her expression changed, first confusion, then anger, then fear. I saw her realize her game was over. Her parents also gradually began to realize the extent of her manipulations. They challenged her to conversations, asking specific questions, and each time, her answers contradicted the documents or facts I showed her. She tried to defend herself, pretending I was exaggerating, that I'd made up the evidence, but my parents saw the inconsistencies, and this time believed the facts, not her. The atmosphere at home changed. My sister could no longer scream and accuse me of ruining her life, because every conversation ended with her actions being documented, verifiable, and obvious. I watched her confidence crumble, losing her power over the people she'd previously been able to manipulate. At college, the situation also stabilized in my favor. Those who had doubted her now openly asked her, "Why did you hide the truth?" Or, "Why did you try to make him look guilty?" Her answers became unconvincing, her social standing weakened. Inside, I felt satisfied, but I understood that the victory had been achieved not through outright screaming and revenge, but through calm, systematic exposure. I saw that she was beginning to understand the consequences of her actions. Her reputation was damaged, her friends were losing trust, her parents were no longer fully supporting her in all her decisions. Her usual manipulation was no longer working, and my determination, preparation, and the facts I had gathered had left her vulnerable. The hatred she felt for me was turned against her. I was no longer someone she could humiliate with impunity. Every action she took now had consequences, and she felt it. A feeling of triumph filled me, but without malice, I understood that justice had been served. My parents and I gradually discussed how to rectify the situation so that she would learn responsibility and I would no longer be under the pressure of her hatred. My sister tried to create a semblance of reconciliation, but I saw her true motives and remained calm. I no longer allowed her to manipulate me, and her attempts to regain influence only confirmed who was really to blame and who had lost trust. Ultimately, after several weeks of hard work, communicating with friends and family, and presenting evidence, my sister's reputation was destroyed. People saw her true side, and my reputation was completely restored. I felt an inner relief, satisfaction, and the knowledge that justice had been achieved. My sister was left feeling defeated, the tension in the family eased, and for the first time, I felt I could live without constant pressure and humiliation. This story ended with my moral victory and the restoration of my people's trust, as well as the realization that hatred and manipulation always have consequences. Finally, the day came when the tension in the house became unbearable. For several weeks, my sister had been trying to control the situation by manipulating her parents and friends, but her efforts were gradually backfiring. My parents looked tired, their glances darting from her to me, as if they themselves weren't sure whose side to take. I sensed this would be a decisive conversation, and I mentally prepared myself to remain calm and composed. Mom called us to the table, Dad sat across from me, and I noticed my sister sat tensely, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze fixed on the floor. Dad began the conversation with both sternness and calm. He said that conflicts, manipulation, and hidden debts had ruined the atmosphere in the house, and that it was time to sort things out once and for all. He looked at my sister, asking directly, why did she continue to try to control others, and why did she distort the facts about my actions? My sister tried to defend herself, saying that I had ruined her holiday, that it was my revenge, that I had initially wanted to humiliate her in front of her friends. But Dad stopped her with a stern look and said that explanations didn't change the essence. Her actions had consistently hurt others, including me, and now she had to bear the consequences. Mom added that she had seen me gather evidence, show the facts to friends and family, and that the goal wasn't to humiliate, but to restore justice. My sister exploded. She screamed that it was unfair, that everyone was turning against her, that no one understood her suffering, and that I was simply taking advantage of the situation to get revenge. I remained silent and calmly showed her screenshots of messages, bank letters, and photos of receipts. It was all systematized and logical. No one could deny the facts. My parents examined the evidence, asked clarifying questions, and I answered calmly without emotion, simply the facts. At first, my sister tried to interrupt, offering false explanations, but each of her versions was easily refuted. I saw her face change from anger to confusion and fear. She knew she couldn't get out of this now. The atmosphere had reached its breaking point. My father said it wasn't just a moral issue, but a financial one as well. Debts, threats from banks, hidden loans. These were liabilities that couldn't be ignored. My sister tried to object, but my mother gently but firmly said that the truth couldn't be ignored, and that from now on, her every move would be monitored. I saw a growing sense of defeat within my sister, that her habitual manipulation and victimhood were no longer working. Then my father proposed concrete steps. She must fully acknowledge her debts, create a payment plan, stop manipulating her friends and family, and her every action would now be monitored. My sister remained silent, but her eyes burned with a mixture of rage and fear. I realized that for the first time, she was realizing the consequences of her hatred and actions. At that moment, I felt an inner peace. My revenge, through facts and restraint, had achieved its goal. I was no longer a victim of her manipulation. I was able to show everyone who was truly to blame and who suffered. She tried to protest, but my parents no longer allowed her to justify herself. I saw that her reputation with her family and friends was completely crumbling. The next day, I noticed changes in her behavior. She began avoiding direct contact, wrote less on social media, and stopped trying to twist events to her advantage. Relative peace appeared in the house, although tension remained. She understood that her influence had diminished, and I felt emotionally satisfied. I saw that my parents now trusted me more, saw my restraint and ability to act rationally. My sister, although still angry, could no longer control the situation. I realized that the final victory of my revenge was achieved not through scandals and shouting, but through facts, restraint, and strategy. My parents and I gradually discussed how to restore trust and the atmosphere in the house so that conflicts would not recur. My sister tried to save face, pretending everything was fine, but deep down she knew her actions had had consequences. Inside, I felt relief and confidence. The hatred she felt for me had been turned against her, and my revenge strategy had worked. This moment was a turning point. I was no longer the object of humiliation, and my sister was experiencing, for the first time, a full-blown backlash against her manipulations. We hadn't completely resolved all the grievances, the tension remained, but the dynamic of the relationship had changed. I now knew I could defend myself and my reputation, and this sense of control and justice gave me an inner victory. In the following days, I watched as her influence among her friends gradually faded. Her version of events was no longer taken seriously, and my reputation was completely restored. I understood that revenge was needed not for humiliation, but to restore justice and demonstrate the consequences of hatred and manipulation. This ending left me with a sense of moral victory, inner resilience, and the understanding that perseverance, evidence, and rational action can completely change the balance of power in the family and among others. My sister, though she tried to maintain a calm demeanor, could no longer maintain the illusion of victimhood. Her reputation was ruined, and I was able to regain my place, the respect, and trust of my friends and parents. The conflict was over, but the lesson remained. Hatred and manipulation always return to those who commit them, and strategic and calm revenge can be effective and morally justified.